Pope Francis addresses crowds at the Vatican following the death of Benedict XVI. Thousands were in St. Peter's Square to hear him pay tribute to his predecessor, who died yesterday.
Let us all join together with one heart and one soul in thanking God for this faithful servant of the Gospel and the Church.
The late Pope will lie in state for 3 days before his funeral on Thursday, also tonight. After another wave of Russian attacks, NATO's Secretary General says support for Ukraine is long-term. Lula da Silva is sworn in as Brazil's new president 20 years after first becoming leader. And big celebrations see in 2023 after 2 years of muted and cancelled events due to the COVID pandemic. Good evening. Pope Francis has addressed thousands of people who've gathered at St. Peter's Square in the Vatican a day after the death of Benedict XVI. The Pope described his predecessor as a faithful servant of the Gospel and the Church. From tomorrow, the body of the former pontiff will lie in state before his funeral on Thursday. Here's our religion editor, Ali Makboul.
They gathered at a Mass for peace at St. Peter's Basilica. This traditional start to the Catholic New Year was, of course, overshadowed by the passing of Benedict XVI. His successor talked of now entrusting the Pope Emeritus to the Holy Mother for his journey to God. Later, it was many thousands that poured into St. Peter's Square to see Pope Francis appear at a balcony and to hear a prayer for his predecessor.
Let us all join together with one heart and one soul in thanking God for this faithful servant of the Gospel and the Church.
The legacy of Pope Benedict for some people is complicated by the way he's viewed to have handled abuse scandals, particularly while he was Archbishop of Munich. How do you look back at that now?
On the one hand, we can say that also Pope Benedict, just as Archbishop of Munich, he was not so strong in these affairs. But on the other hand, we must say, also as Pope, during all his pastoral visits, one meeting was dedicated to persons who suffered by the Church, also by sexual abuses.
Even those who worked with and knew the late Pope well acknowledge mistakes were made. But some of those who happened to have been visiting from far afield when the news broke feel honoured to be here now.
We did not know that he passed until we were actually here and we saw the lines, and my wife and I were very blessed because we did have the opportunity to see him here and have the New Year's Mass many years ago. So it was very it touched us very personally.
So what are you going to take away from this experience?
How much he meant to everyone, how much he impacted everyone, what did they do for him? You know, seeing people cry and get all emotional, got me emotional as well.
Over the coming 3 days, the Pope Emeritus will lie in state for the masses who will want to pay tribute to him in person. Ali Makboul, BBC News at the Vatican.
The Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, says support for Ukraine has to be long-term and mustn't waver. His comments were made in the wake of Russia's latest assault on the country, including an attack on a children's hospital in Kherson. Ukraine's armed forces say they've shot down dozens of Iranian-made drones fired since New Year's Eve by the Russians. Our correspondent Hugo Pachega is live in Kiev for us, where there are air raid warnings tonight. Hugo?
Yeah, Clive, we're here in the basement. It is a little bit after midnight here in Kyiv. The air raid alert sounded about an hour ago. And I think this gives you an idea of the reality of millions of Ukrainians across the country who have to deal with these air raid alerts day and night, missile attacks, also drone attacks. And Ukrainians are tired of these airstrikes that have hit places like Kyiv, away from the front lines. And the army said on Sunday that at least 32 of those drones that Russia has been using to attack this country were shot down, many here in Kyiv. And the authorities accuse Russia of deliberately targeting civilians by launching those attacks as people were celebrating the new year. Now, we heard from Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO chief who defended more military support for Ukraine. He said this would force Russia to negotiate. But he also said there were no signs that Russia wanted to end the war. He said Moscow was actually preparing more attacks. And this is something that we've heard from Ukrainian officials in recent weeks. And just days ago, the spy chief told me that Russia was preparing another mobilization of conscripts, and an announcement could come as soon as this week.
Hugo, many thanks in Kyiv to you and your team. Thank you. New figures show record numbers of migrants tried to reach the UK across the Channel last year, almost 46,000. That's 60% more than in 2021. The Prime Minister says legislation will be brought in this year to tackle illegal immigration. Our correspondent Zoe Conway has been looking at the numbers. Zoe.
These figures are preliminary, but they show a big increase on the previous year, with a record rise in the numbers crossing in small boats. More than 45,700 migrants crossed the Channel in small boats last year. In 2021, just over 28,500 made the crossing. Government figures released a few weeks ago show that it's not just the number of boats that's going up, it's also the number of people being packed onto them. In 2019, there were on average 11 people per boat. 2 years later, 28 people were being put onto each boat. By last year, 40 people on average were packed into each dinghy. Men, women and children desperate to be rescued from a sinking dinghy in mid-December. 4 perished. They drowned in the freezing waters. How to stop people making this perilous crossing? Refugee charities say it needs to be easier for asylum seekers to seek refuge.
We need more safe routes which will allow people to get to the UK and apply for asylum without having to be exploited by people smugglers, without having to put their lives in danger.
But Prime Minister Rishi Sunak wants a new law so that if people enter illegally, they are then not able to remain in the UK. So what are the nationalities of the people getting onto these boats? Well, between January and September last year, the greatest number, that's 35%, came from Albania. The next biggest group came from Afghanistan. And the other top nationalities were from Iran, Iraq and Syria. The government says it will use every tool at its disposal to deter illegal migration and to disrupt the business model of people smugglers. Clive.
Zoe, thank you for that. Zoe Conway then. Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva has been sworn in as Brazil's new president 20 years after first becoming the country's leader. Almost 5 years ago, he was sent to jail for corruption on charges that have since been annulled. He now inherits a deeply divided country, as our South America correspondent Katie Watson now reports.
A return to power for the man Barack Obama once called the most popular politician in the world. Security was tight amid threats of violence by supporters of his far-right predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro. Mr. Bolsonaro didn't even hand over the presidential sash, instead abandoning his final official duty by flying to Florida. Lula's the same man, but he inherits a very different country to the one he led before. In his speech, he promised unity and reconstruction, starting in the Amazon.
We don't need to cut any trees down, just plant millions of hectares so people can live without destroying the forest, burning it or encroaching on our environment.
An estimated 300,000 people turned up for today's ceremony, a sea of red, supporters decked out in the colour of Lula's Workers' Party. Many came for the music festival put on by Lula's wife, thousands had travelled across Brazil to witness his return.
Today has been part ceremonial pomp, but there's been a real festival atmosphere here. Brazil's gone through a difficult few years. It was hit hard by the pandemic, by political divide. But you speak to people here and they say this is a new beginning.
Not him anymore. We are here fighting in name of democracy. That's why we are here today.
Love conquers hate, this placard says, perhaps somewhat optimistic, because for Lula's critics, he's still a corrupt politician who should never have been voted back in. He'll have to convince them that he can be their leader too for the next 4 years. Katie Watson, BBC News in Brasilia.
The environmental campaign group Extinction Rebellion says it will temporarily stop using public disruption tactics in its protests because very little has changed. Its activists have gained notoriety for blocking roads, railways and airports. The movement says it now wants to target the seat of power and hold a demonstration outside the Houses of Parliament later this year. In his New Year message, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has described the social care system as broken. He says residential homes are struggling to deal with rising costs as well as experiencing a shortage of carers, and that everyone should work to improve it. Lambeth Palace will release a report on social care later this month. The government says it's providing £7.5 billion to support the sector over the next 2 years.
We know our care system is broken, but it doesn't have to be. We can rise to the challenge of fixing it. That means action from all of us, you, me, families, communities, government.
Anita Pointer, one of the original members of the singing group The Pointer Sisters, has died. She was 74. They had a string of hits in the 70s and 80s, winning several Grammy Awards. Stefan Powell looks back at her life.
Thanks to a diverse blend of rhythm and blues, funk and soul, the Pointer Sisters were responsible for songs that are still lighting up dance floors decades after they were first performed. And making an impact on wider popular culture too. It was the 1973 song Yes We Can, with its Anita-led vocals calling for togetherness during a time of racial unrest in the US that catapulted the group into the mainstream.
Try to live as brothers.
Originally from Oakland in California, Anita Pointer and her sisters went on to win Grammy Awards and become prominent features in the American music charts. Still performing into her late 60s, Anita suffered personal tragedy during her life, losing her only child, Jada Pointer, to cancer in 2003. The singer went on to raise her granddaughter. She's died aged 74, surrounded by her family in California, who've said that heaven is a more loving, beautiful place with Anita there.
Anita Pointer of the Pointer Sisters, who's died at the age of 74. There have been New Year celebrations around the world after 2 years of muted or cancelled events due to the COVID pandemic. Crowds erupted into cheers as New York ushered in 2023 in Times Square. Thousands gathered along the Champs-Élysées in Paris as the Arc de Triomphe counted down to midnight. In Edinburgh, revellers enjoyed the first full Hogmanay celebrations in 3 years. While in London, it was the chimes of Big Ben that marked the end of 2022, with the London Eye lit up in blue and yellow, the colours of the Ukrainian flag. The capital's New Year fireworks display paid tribute to the late Queen Elizabeth. And the final event of the day saw thousands of performers take part in a New Year's Day parade. More than 8,000 entertainers delighted the crowds along the route. It was the first full parade for 3 years and is thought to have attracted up to 500,000 spectators. Now, with the day's sport, here's Jane Dougal at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi, Jane.
Thank you, Clive. We're going to start with the Premier League. So if you want to wait for Match of the Day 2, now is the time to leave the room. In the first of two fixtures, Tottenham dropped points at home after losing 2-0 to Aston Villa. That's put more pressure on manager Antonio Conte, with only 2 wins from Spurs' last 7. A mistake by keeper Hugo Lloris allowed Villa the first goal. Douglas Luiz then doubled their lead. It's a valuable win for Villa, who are 12th in the league. Graham Potter's Chelsea could only manage a draw away to Nottingham Forest despite Raheem Sterling scoring first. Forest were eventually rewarded for their perseverance, Serge Aurier with the equaliser. Steve Cooper's side remain in the bottom 3. Chelsea are 8th. Tennis, and Great Britain are through to their city final in the inaugural United Cup after finishing top of their Sydney-based group. The mixed tournament is being played across Australia. British number 2 Dan Evans defeated Albert Ramos Vinolas to give his country an unassailable lead over Spain. Joe Wilson has this report.
Something is happening in Australia, down under the radar maybe, but this is new team tennis. The United Cup is a mixed gender event. Here's Harriet Dart in blue for Great Britain.
And she's got it this time.
On a tie-break, she took the first set of the day against Spain's Paula Badosa. It's Team Henman. He is the captain.
Great work.
Yeah, it was, but Badosa is ranked 85 places above Dart, and she recovered to win in 3 sets. Now, could Dan Evans at the bottom of the screen beat Albert Ramos Vinolas, world number 39? Leading the support, Cameron Norrie, who beat Rafa Nadal earlier in the weekend. This to put Britain through.
Game, set match in Great Britain.
Third set 6-3. The United Cup is one new tournament among many tennis events soon underway. But you can see Great Britain taking it very seriously. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Wales's Gerwyn Price, the world number 1 darts player, has been knocked out of the World Championship by Germany's Gabriel Clemens. At one point, Price put on ear defenders to drown out the noise from the Alexandra Palace crowd. That didn't help the Welshman, though, who was comprehensively beaten 5-1 by Clemens. In the other evening match, 3-time world champion Michael van Gerwen whitewashed England's Chris Dobie 5-0. Rugby Union and Northampton Saints thrashed Harlequins 46 points to 17 in the English Premiership. James Ram went over twice for the Saints, getting 2 of their 6 tries. The win puts a dent in Harlequins' hopes of taking the title. They're 3rd in the table. Saints are 5th. Well, you can find more on the rest of the day's Rugby Union news over on the BBC Sport website. But that's it for now. Clive.
Jane, thank you for that. Now, time for a look at the weather, and Stav Danaeus is here. Hi, Stav.
Hi there, Clive. Thank you very much. Good evening to you. We had mixed fortunes of weather for New Year's Day, up and down across the country. Heavy showers, some rain in the south, cold in the north. And indeed, this upcoming first week of 2023 will be mostly mild, quite unsettled, with wind and rain at times. But there will be some drier, chillier, settled interludes as well. And this ridge of high pressure will bring us a fine, dry and settled interlude for our bank holiday Monday, probably the best day of the week, in fact. But it will bring with it some chillier air, as you can see from the blue hue behind me. But those weather fronts across central and southern areas which have brought the rain will slowly ease down overnight. There'll still be some showers around North Wales, North West England, the odd heavy one. Some showers for north and western Scotland as well, wintry in flavour as well. But a cold night to come for most areas, fairly mild in the south, but further north where we have lying snow, then a risk of ice to greet us first thing tomorrow morning. A few showers dotted around the northwest of England, a few through the Channel into southeast England. Those will fizzle out through the day. A few showers for western Scotland, a bit wintry again over the hills, but for the majority of the country it's looking lovely. Plenty of sunshine around, but it'll feel cooler despite the sunshine. Highs of 3 to 9 Celsius, actually closer to the seasonal norm. But then the Atlantic comes back to life. We see wet and windy weather sweep through on Tuesday, maybe a drier spell on Wednesday before more rain and wind pushes in for Thursday and Friday. So it is a bit of a roller coaster week, mostly unsettled and mild, particularly in the south. Just hints of something a bit colder across all areas as we move in towards the end of the week. Clive.
Okay, Stav, thank you. Stav Danaeus there. That's it from me and the team. Have a very good night and Happy New Year.